When setting up a business, every entrepreneur needs to take into account the laws of the land where they are setting up the business. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize the power of doing this right at the point when they set up, especially right at the beginning. The laws of the land govern the way you are going to operate your business, what you will do in case there was an incident or something, and at the end of the day, it will protect your business so that you are set for success and you'll be able to operate without issues. In the West, this is something that may come across as simpler for startups. Information is available online, and there are a lot of resources that are available for entrepreneurs to access the services. Moreover, entrepreneurs in the West, I think they have an opportunity to access even not so expensive services because they could be charities or other organizations that are offering these services. However, I am not so sure if the case is the same for startups in Africa and other third world countries. I'm not so sure how much this information is available for them, even if they wanted to access it online. And so today, I have taken it upon myself to have a conversation with an amazing young gentleman who has got a legal background. And he has invested a lot of his time over the years in trying to understand this space. And he is doing a lot of work to enable entrepreneurs on the continent to make sure this information is available to them and they can set up for success. His name is Ronald Mutasa, and we want to thank him because he's made his time out of his precious day to come and have a conversation with us. Ronald, welcome to the channel, and thank you so much for making time. I know you are even coming from very important meetings and work that you had today, but you made time to have this conversation, so thank you for giving your time.
Well, thank you, Fungai, for inviting me in the first place. I think it's always a delight to follow the journey that you've gone through and to be part of this series. So thank you very much for welcoming me today.
Thank you. And so I know you've had an amazing journey, Ronald. So I'm going to give you an opportunity for you to tell the audience and tell us, how did you end up doing what you're doing from Chitungwiza, all the way from Chitungwiza?
Yeah.
And we are now here in England.
We're sitting in London.
Yeah, and it will be amazing for you to just
Bridge.
tell us. Yes, overlooking the London Bridge, of course. So tell us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Fungai. And like you say, it's on reflection every time I think about where I am, where I'm working, and the journey that I've taken through. I'm always amazed at sometimes where you start and where you actually end up. And I think for us, particularly in Africa, the stakes are rather very high for you to actually succeed, particularly in business. But a bit about myself. My name is Ronald, like what Fungai said. I am a business lawyer, but I primarily practice my law in finance, projects, and restructurings.
Right.
So I've done some key projects on the continent, particularly in Zimbabwe. I work for a law firm called DLA Piper Africa, Zimbabwe, which is a Swiss verein or part of a larger global firm that is called DLA Piper, which has some offices here in London and the US and all over Europe. In fact, we are in 40 countries in the world. So I am a partner, a consultant partner in the Zimbabwe office, and I now reside here in London, and at the moment I work out of the local DLA Piper office to continue the work I've been doing.
Absolutely.
DLA Piper Zimbabwe is basically, it's a business law firm with strategic alliances all over Europe, America, the Middle East. And I think the strength of those alliances that we've cultivated along the way have really helped us to scale our business. We started up, I consider our business a startup,
Right.
because the business started off as two lawyers who had an idea on how they could, introduce the best way of practicing law that was different from how our traditional law firms were practicing law in Zim. And I would like to believe we've really been able to achieve that in the last 10 years, if the accolades that we have received are anything to go by. So like I said, I primarily practice finance, projects, and restructuring. And some of the projects that we've done, which maybe the audience may know of, is the current Bridge Border Post expansion project.
Right.
I was the lead local lawyer on that. We're currently advising an Australian junior who is exploring the Mzarabani oil and gas fields to see if we can find any oil and gas, which we're excited about. I've also worked as a lead counsel, or at least part of the team that's also doing a solar power station at Minyati, which is one of the big solar stations in Zim that currently is at funding stage.
Right.
And then on the technology front, I've really enjoyed working with startups over the years. So some of the startups I've worked with are Low Basket, whom I used to be invited to mentor some of the startups. I have also worked with a lot of startups, and currently I also help a startup that is in the energy tech space, and currently has reached seed funding. And is currently at Series A and trying to look for some funding in Australia in order to scale the business up. So that's something, I think, a journey that I've taken over the years. I'm a product of the local University of Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Did my undergrad in the University of Zimbabwe, and then afterwards, like I've said, practiced business law, which I've been doing for the past 13 years now.
Amazing.
So yeah, this is where I am today, and glad to talk about startups in a short while.
Thank you so much. So shout out to Use It. You guys, you always think who is coming from Use It. Here is a Use It project.
Yeah, I am.
So thank you so much, University of Zimbabwe. Really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. And it's an amazing journey, isn't it? To come from humble beginnings, and when you look back, you think that, you have got something to contribute back to the community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think personally, I feel like I owe it to the rest of the colleagues and rest of the businesses that we work with, to give back something that you've learned. I don't believe we work in a vacuum. I think to be a good corporate citizen, you contribute in so many different ways. Some contribute in money, some contribute like me because we are business advisors. I do believe the business advice that we give is worth its weight in gold. So I think it's all about all of us playing a part, like you say. But yeah, on reflection, it's really amazing that you could be in a position where people can look up to you and the business that you've built in order to get ideas and advice on how to run businesses generally.
Absolutely. So I think you have opened up a conversation that we are going to continue on the piece that the misconceptions that you can only interact with the law when you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because I have spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, and they don't realize the importance of having to involve your lawyers from the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ronald, I really want us to dig deeper and talk about this aggravating topic, misconceptions about the importance of law, because people always associate the law with criminals. And people always feel that lawyers, when people come to you, you are just so hungry to chop their money. They don't think about the benefit.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the fact that you've used the word aggravating, because every time I talk to people and I hear lawyers are expensive, it really triggers me, if I can say that. Because I think expense, first of all, is relative. It just depends on how you're viewing a certain function. And secondly, if I'm still on that issue of expense, I always ask the very same people who say lawyers expensive to say, okay, can you give me statistics of how many lawyers have you spoken with? What has been their pricing? And have you suggested in any way that you can't afford it, and have you suggested what you can actually afford?
Right.
And I think in those 4 points, I've actually sort of hinted at how startups can actually approach law firms.
Right.
So it's aggravating in the sense that the legal function or the law is actually treated, in my view, as a nuisance. You don't want to deal with lawyers until you have to.
Yeah.
And usually when you're dealing with lawyers, we call ourselves firefighters. You look for a lawyer when your house is burning, yeah? Not when you're building your house. You want to look for the lawyer when your house is burning. So I think, for me particularly, I think startups should really realize that a legal function should be present from the start.
Right.
When you're starting to do your things. The usual, journey that a startup takes is you're sleeping on your bed, you come up with a brilliant idea, you sort of work at it yourself, and then eventually you find, okay, I may have a scalable business here. And then you get onto it, you start building the business side of it. So if it's a technology platform, you start building it, you look for people to help you, programming and the like. Once you have that, you have to now start thinking about the four corners of this. How am I, at the end of the heart of it, it's a business. How am I building a business? And in any business, there are critical functions. HR, whether you want to call it the leadership or the CEO, the senior partners, that's fine. You have your employees. And for me, I think the legal function is one of those pillars you can never ignore. And I'll give you an example that is really surprising in its simplicity. So we know here in the UK and in the West, particularly in the UK and Europe, that the GDPR is such a huge thing when it comes to data protection.
Right.
Back in the day, you could afford to scale your business by collecting people's information. You know, you go around with a book. Can I use your details to do X, Y, Z, and Y, Z? And you think to yourself, I'm safe, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But now the astronomical penalties that you get for collecting information or even misuse of information could just drive any startup into the ground before you even start.
Absolutely.
Now, let's bring that even closer home. I've spoken with so many startups who, shockingly, don't even know that Zimbabwe now has a Data Protection Act. They don't know that in terms of the law, they are required either to employ a data protection officer or to have access to one. And the data protection officer has to make sure that every time that data is transferred, either transferred, stored, or processed, they must be able to give a report to say, in terms of the law, what are we supposed to do with this? Now, for me, that's actually leads me to an aggravating point again, where, again, I come back to the thing that the law is treated as a nuisance. You don't want to read up on the legal function. You don't want to know what the legal function is all about until you get in trouble. Not trouble as such, but sometimes you, in my experience, you often get founders coming to you when they're at that stage where someone has said, hey, I have a bag of money, can I invest in you?
Yeah.
And then the questions that those funders now start asking, you now realize, oh, okay, I'm still 6 months away from getting the money, because they want to know, how am I structured? How have I done my data protection? Do I have employment contracts in place? Do I employ anyone? And most of funders, you find that it's a collection of people who have all assisted in coming up with an idea.
Yeah.
So we always say to ourselves, oh, I've given you shareholding, I've given you shareholding. Now the funders want to know, do you have a shareholders agreement? How did you give all the shareholding? What does that mean? Who holds what, who holds what? All those things are a legal function. So for me, it then becomes really aggravating, because you realize that should have been the first step that you've taken, rather than the last step.
But you know what? Talking from an entrepreneur who started from zero, exactly what you've just described, right? When I came into the UK and we started our first business, the first healthcare business that I set up was, I went round the block where we used to live, block of flats, and with a survey, if I opened a business and start sending people to care homes and to hospitals, paying you this much, would you work
with me?
With me. And literally those who said, yes, this is my phone number, this is my name. And guess what? Just with that information, these people, I had recruited them. And without collecting any further information, I was able to send these people to work, right?
Exactly.
But because the law then, that is 21 years ago, the law then was not where it is today. We didn't have GDPR or anything. So on reflection and from personal experiences, all I'm saying is, as an entrepreneur when you're starting, honestly, the law is the last thing on your mind. So that's why we are having this conversation. But nowadays, it's a different ball game. Because we live in a digital era as well. As long as you start thinking an idea, there's many other 1,000 people thinking of the same idea at the same time when you're thinking it, right?
Absolutely.
And so there is a possibility that that same idea, by the time you go to the investors have had hundreds of other people pitch the same idea.
That's true.
Hence, you will start saying, oh, I went to pitch my idea and they stole my idea. Well, nobody stole your idea. You should have protected the
yourself
idea
from the inside.
From the conception stage. So I like the fact that law or legal is one of the pillars that you must have. Human resources being one. For me, my lesson was when I went through the recession. And I woke up having lost 3/4 of the business.
Wow.
I didn't have no lawyers, I'm being honest. I didn't have no lawyers because I hadn't had that interaction.
Yeah.
But that journey, that time, I realized that the most important people a business needs was number one, your lawyers.
Yeah.
Number two, your accountant.
Yeah.
Number three, your bank.
Yes.
For me, these were the people who walked this journey for me. But since that time, these people are my pillars
Yeah.
in the business.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting that you mentioned that startups, they come to you and say, we now need
Yeah.
a law. And so what do you do with them
Yeah.
at that stage?
Well, yeah, obviously at that stage, that's exactly when the issue of money comes up.
Right.
Because the startup is saying, well, the reason I didn't come to you in the first place
I didn't
is
have
because I assumed you're expensive. But now because I need you, I want help, but I still can't pay. And so you then ask yourself, well, if you're still in the same boat that you were 20 months ago, you might as well have come 20 months ago and would have had this conversation. Look, in my experience, nothing really precludes you as a client to approach a lawyer and say, I would like to help work with you. I can't pay for your services at the moment. Can you, as we say in the local language, can you write your bill on my back
Yeah.
in blood, so that eventually when I do get my money, I may pay you. You may even find that some lawyers in some advanced jurisdictions, they'll take equity in the business.
Absolutely.
They like your idea, they see it's scalable, they'll note the time that they've taken, and eventually they'll convert that time into some sort of equity, which they'll then receive their payout once an investor comes in and says, okay, I want to put $1 million in there. The lawyer looks at his books and says, oh, of that million, $100,000 is actually the work I've done. Can you buy me out on my portion of the equity? So all those, in my view, are so many conversations you can have with your lawyers. Some startups also can even put a down payment for, in some jurisdictions, not allowed to have a retainer, like it would in others, because then it's seen as if, lawyers can't just hold money when they're not doing the job.
Absolutely.
But in those jurisdictions, in Africa, for instance, where it's allowed, it's also another avenue. Have lawyers on retainer. You just put a bit of money on the side that if you do need lawyers, you can actually access those lawyers and say, I need help. I paid this amount of money for you to help me when I needed the help. So I think if you really look at it at the end of the day, it's just a fear, in my view, of the unknown, or the fear that lawyers are expensive. For every lawyer that you deem expensive, there are 5 others who are willing to help. So for me, if you approach a lawyer who says, I want $10,000 up front and you can't afford it, guess what? There are 1,000 other law firms you can approach.
Absolutely.
Some are business-minded, some are geared towards startups and understand the market, and they would never ask you for $10,000 up front.
And some are willing to do it as a giving back.
Some are willing to do it as pro bono, because there are a lot of charities there who give money to some law firms or some organizations to help startups.
Absolutely.
So you realize that by actually not approaching your lawyers to ask, or any lawyer to ask, you're actually disadvantaging yourself, because there's a lot of information that you're not aware of.
Absolutely.
If I can't help you, I have a network of other lawyers who I know can help you, and they have different reasons for doing so. Some, like you say, would do it as a public service, and so you should be able to be able to access that. So, startups should stop thinking of lawyers and law as a nuisance. It's a necessity for your business, because any business is underpinned by contracts. You want to be an influencer, as an example to the TikTok generation, you need an influencer agreement. Guess who's going to draft that? It's a lawyer. Guess who's going to interpret most of the things you need to know about? It's a lawyer. So you can't avoid them. So you might as well work with them, because then sometimes they can help you and point you in all directions and protect. You talked about protection. Protect your ideas. I've worked with so many, not worked, but I've had so many reports, and some startups come to me and say, oh, we approached X company, and X company, we pitched the idea to them, and then the next moment, X company is now taken my idea and they're running with it. I need compensation for X company. And I always say to people, okay, 2 things. Firstly, when you went to them, how did you go to them? Did you meet in a pub and say to them, I have an idea, can I come to the office on Monday? And they say, oh, come along. You come there all by yourself. It's not a business. It's almost like an extension
over a cup of tea.
Over a cup of tea. So, this is what I was thinking. I've identified an opportunity, blah, blah, blah. You spill out your beans and then you leave.
Yeah.
That person is not precluded by law from actually taking that, tweaking it a bit, and then running away with it. Because there is no protection that you've afforded for yourself. Yeah. So I know there are companies in the market who are always stated to be stealing other people's ideas, but I always ask people, claim that, to say, okay, can I understand the journey you took? How did you go? Where did you go? What agreements did you sign? What agreement did you have in place with those people? And most of the times there's no agreement, and there's not even a contract written at the backside of a napkin. It was all verbal. And so it becomes that they said, I said, they said, I said. And funny enough is other people don't actually know this, but serious businesses in the startup game have bankfuls of ideas that they simply bank. I hear your idea, I bank it. I hear it, I bank it. I hear it, bank it. When you come to me and you say you have an idea, guess what? I probably have an idea already in my bank, but all I'll just do is listen to what you've said. Maybe I missed it in my original idea, retrieve that, tweak it a bit, and I run with it. And by the time you start to want to do it, I have the funds, I've already run away with it. Absolutely. And I've blown you out of the water as a competition. So
but also, I always say to entrepreneurs, right? Yeah. An idea is not a business. Up until you've done something about it, like we're saying, as long as you are thinking about something, there are thousands of other people thinking about the exact same
thing.
The execution may be different because your thought process might be very different. Yeah. But never think that an idea is so unique to you that there's nobody thinking. Yeah. So that's very important to be aware is number one. Absolutely. And then number two, like you've rightfully said, protect the idea. Yeah. It is very simple. I always say to people, it is very simple for you to have your idea, write it down. Mm-hmm. And if you really think the idea is unique to you, if you find information of how you can simply protect that idea, you write it down, you go to the lawyers, they will tell you and support you how to do it. Yeah. And then you protect the idea, you patent it. Yeah. Or to pay a very small amount of money, from as little as 750 pounds. You can protect and patent. You can start the protection journey. You can start the protection journey so that either, I mean, a lot of people, you can even see, so simple, sometimes what people do, the example that you're talking about, if you want to start a website, for instance, and you go on the domain websites and the like, you realize you just got to pay a little bit of money, and then they protect that domain for you for the year, and that's it. But somehow, people don't extend that to the ideas that they get. And you're right, you know, ideas, one example I always give to people is there's so many ways to skin a cat. Right now, if we were doing this virtually, we could either use Zoom, Teams, 1,000 other WhatsApp. Yeah. All of them are still geared for the same audience, and the purpose is to have a virtual call. But the way they go about is all different. And they protected their ideas in such a way that you can then build a business based on it. Absolutely. But if you say to yourself, oh, I have this brilliant idea where people are going to talk virtually, guess what? There are 1,000 people who already have the same idea, but you don't have a business because it's an idea. So I like what you say. You don't have a business. An idea is not a business until you've protected it and you start scaling it up. So I think that's a big lesson for startups. And honestly, it's worth it because the amount sometimes is so minimal that you will find that the protection it accords you over the long term will negate any upfront payments you would have made. Because then you realize that had I not protected this, then other people would have started the idea and gone away with it. So I think it's I mean, we can talk specifics at some point with any person in the audience who would love to talk about how I can protect the idea, where I can go. But you realize that in most African countries, you have your local trademark office. Absolutely. That you can approach. Lawyers can help you draft the papers, and then you can lodge it, and then they approve it, and then you can protect your idea for some time. If you want to widen it, you can even go to a regional office, where we actually have one in Harare, where you can actually have your trademark on the regional platform, and you can protect your idea regionally. Of course, it costs you a bit more money. On the world stage, you can also do the same. I'll give you an example. So when we worked on a project, right? I'm a founder of CheckUp Health. Yeah. Patient-facing app. Well, I'm your customer. Clinical dashboard. Oh, that's good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, and the app is amazing. So the journey of that technology, the idea in me was born in 2004. Wow. When my father and my father-in-law died a week apart from undiagnosed diabetes. They were both known They were both known hypertensive patients.
Yeah.
So I was so angry and I had this frustration, and I thought, oh my gosh, what can I do? But that idea from 2004, through a series of other events, I was in India on a business trip and I got sick in a hospital.
Wow.
And again, I needed care, but I didn't want to be admitted in a hospital. So when these people were able to create a team that came and turned my hospital room into my hotel room into a hospital room, that idea cemented. And that was years later, because I think that happened quite a few years later, maybe I think in 2014, 15, right?
Yeah.
So first idea, 2004, 10 years later, that idea has been
crystallizing.
cooking and crystallizing. It is from that trip when I realized that, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And for that week, when I'm in that bed, I'm writing notes on my notebook. This idea literally crystallized, like I was downloading it from somewhere. And so when I came back to England, we were already working on the NHS long-term plan. NHS is saying they're going digital. So all those things together, they crystallized my idea.
Yeah.
And then we were working and building and creating the platform. Yet did we not patent it or protect it like we are discussing, but I was a seasoned business person, right? I'm just giving an example. But what we didn't do though is, what we did though is we had done the basic legal basis from the experience that I have as an entrepreneur. And then fast forward, we were just about to launch this platform in 2020, January, when the pandemic happened. Right, so the pandemic happens and then we have an opportunity. Black people are dying more than the white counterparts. There is this problem with COVID. Why are people dying? So I now connect that to 2004 when my parents died, and I'm thinking they are all chronic diabetes, hypertension. So what can I do? I have a platform, so what can I do? So we put an application to Innovate UK, and Innovate gives us the money, right? But guess what? On doing the application to Innovate, they wanted to know what work had we done to protect the idea. And guess what? That work that you do to protect the idea, imagine it adds value,
of course,
to your product, because that is the product.
That is the product.
So I wanted to cement, and then I wanted to cement your point. And then on the funding allocated to us, they were actually allocating us funding to use, to submit a patent application towards protection. So that's how important that idea is, because if we had put an application and our idea is not protected, they would have been exposed to say, we could accuse them that they were stealing our idea. But how many digital platforms are out there right now, right?
A lot. There are really a lot. I think any startup, I'm sure any startup was interested in this world has probably watched an episode of Dragons there and Shark Tank and all those other platforms. And most of the dragons or the sharks, they always ask you this question: how have you protected this idea? Because an idea can be replicated.
Absolutely.
And if it's not protected, you can't sue anyone for starting the idea. So most people then, like we say, they look at this as the last thing they need to do, whereas it's actually the first thing they might actually need to do. So it's really almost like shifting our mindset, or can I say being mindful that when you're making a plan and you're scaling your idea, or your idea is crystallizing, don't negate or forget the legal function. Write it down as part of the pillars, because eventually you need to employ someone, even your co-founders. Between the two of you,
someone can steal
the idea and run with it. So you need to have an agreement between yourselves, which talks to how are you going to introduce a third party? What is the protection towards you? Who's putting what? Most people, and you see this with a lot of founders, they end up fighting because yes, we started this in the dorm and then we thought we were in this together, but then he looked for a third party to put money in, and then he decided it was his platform, or he thought about it first, or he's the one who approached the founder first, and people start fighting. So if you had an agreement in place, a shareholders agreement, you realize we didn't even have to fight over this. So I think I keep saying it's a pillar. The legal pillar, the legal function is a pillar. If you are building something, if you leave out a pillar in a critical part of that building can collapse. Which is why I'm saying you need to be mindful of the legal pillar and function as you go along. And as you go along, you realize, okay, I'm glad I did this, I'm glad I did this, I'm glad I did. And that makes your business more attractive.
Exactly, and I was
investors.
going to add that it makes everybody that looks at your venture or your business, the seriousness of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It shows that you are serious and it has a good foundation, and they have got clarity in terms of where they can start with you and how they can support you.
Yeah. And I think that probably would even speak to the issue, I think, around accessibility of information, legal information. So one of my pet peeves is that I think, personally, I think the law, particularly in Zimbabwe, for instance, is really not accessible as one would like, particularly for startups.
Yeah.
I think, like we've said, a lot of startups here in the UK and in Europe, the rest of Europe and America, do quite well because some of this information that they need is freely available.
Right.
If you go online, you could find an employment contract that speaks to UK law that you can simply download, change a few things, and voila, you have an employment contract. Whereas in Zim, it's sort of like you gotta crank out, you gotta find out what works, what doesn't work, and the like. So I think information is not as accessible as, or is not as friendly as you would want it to be.
And how can that be solved?
Well, I think you got to look at how the information, if you go on the websites, in quotes, that are relevant, you realize they really don't speak to a few factors that I think are important. One, in any conversation or in any repository of information, you need to consider who is going to digest that information. So is your audience.
Who is it from?
And I find that most of these legal platforms are platforms made by lawyers for lawyers, or made by legally trained people for lawyers.
But not palatable to
Not
the
palatable
person
to
who needs
exactly to the startups who need the
Right.
information. So it's not good enough, in my view, to say, well, we have this repository that is law cases. But unless someone synthesizes those law cases to find out what's relevant to startups, it's not going to be useful. And the startup is just going to spend hours and hours they can't afford to spend in trying to sift through the information.
Yeah.
Similarly, if startups want to draft contracts, you never know, for instance, is this relevant? Is this not relevant?
Yeah.
What have I left out? What is relevant to my market? So I think it's not good enough to just say, well, there is this platform called Zimli, for instance, where it's a repository of cases decided by the courts. It's not good enough. You need to synthesize that. So for our own bit, and it's something, like I said, it's a pet peeve, and what I've done about it, part of the solution is that my firm is preparing it's not the first, I guess, but it's really a good example of what you can do. We're preparing a startup pack for startups.
That's brilliant.
In Zim, which gives you links to free contracts, shareholders contracts that you can use, employment contracts that you can use, explains the law on startups, gives you access to all the laws that are relevant to your business as you're starting, things that you need to be aware of. And I think hopefully it will be as useful as it was useful to us when we're reading and researching on this.
That's brilliant.
And this will be freely available. We're not asking anyone to pay anything for it. And you also realize that this is something that we adopted from our law firm here in the UK, which was already available for free for startups in the UK and in Ireland. So it's a bit of localizing the information. So I think it's one way of doing it. The other way is, for not startups, but for charities and NGOs that work in that sector to also put funds towards setting up repositories like this for this information.
Brilliant.
So I look at it, for instance, one brilliant platform I really like is the uk.gov website.
Absolutely, I've said that as well.
That is ridiculously good. You want to know about citizenship rights. You want to know about what do I do with my old passport and my driver's license. You want to know about child health care. Can I leave my 10-year-old alone overnight?
Can I leave my snake at home alone?
Can I leave my snake at home? Can I, edit about pets, about dogs, about animals, anything you can. It's such a loaded report. And it's palatable. It's so easy to follow. There's so many links to it. I can imagine that building that platform takes a long time.
Yeah.
But I also feel that
it's
we have to be intentional in how we create this information.
Yeah.
So your audience, like I've said, it's important. If you're a legal aid company, or even if you're an NGO, say in the family law business, you're assisting mothers, or you're assisting children, you're talking about children's rights, youth's rights, women's rights, we'll have a repository of information that's easily accessible and palatable that people can access. And then if you can link this to the main ministries who deal with that, then you find you actually have a point of contact where people can simply click. I mean, we live in a digital age where it should be as easy as just clicking on a website to get all the information you want.
So that's a dream. That's
it is a dream, and it's a very realizable one, I believe. And I think it's something that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been done somewhere. We just need to put some funds into it and do it. So yeah, those are sort of like the low-hanging fruits, so to speak, that I could find that we can utilize without spending too much money.
So why is it that when it comes to startup in Zimbabwe, well, on the African continent, but I'm going to focus startups in Zimbabwe. I'm an investor, and I've attended a few pitches in Zimbabwe, and we end up with investors just listening to the pitches, but not really investing into the startups. And I've been trying to understand, is the problem a legal issue, or there are more other complex issues that we are not aware of?
I think it's a yes and no answer, really, and it's the typical lawyer answer, isn't it? It's the yes and no answer. But I think let's start with, is it a legal problem? I think that most times when investors like yourselves come, or other international investors come, it all depends. Some will come with an open mind to say, I'm going to find ideas and businesses that perhaps are not yet at that stage that I need. So your early seed funders, and they're like, probably come in and say, I'm expecting nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to invest my money into protecting this idea, building this idea, and so I think it's going to cost 25,000, and that's all I'm willing to spend. So in that case, then you could say, if you were coming in to find something that's already solid and ready to explode onto the market, then in that case, it becomes a legal issue. You can't invest because you're thinking this business is not structured, this business is not protected, and so legally speaking, I'm not excited to try and put money into it. So that's the legal where I can say, yes, it's a legal issue. But then on the other side, no, it's not a legal issue. It really just comes down to in my mind, the way that startups perhaps pitch, not the ideas, but the business aspect of the idea.
Right.
I think we keep on harping on the issue that an idea is not a business.
Right.
I feel like most startups pitch on their ideas. They don't pitch on the business side of it. So have you built a business? So I have an idea, yes I have. Have you built a business? Yes I have. Okay, let's hear about the business.
Where's the evidence?
Where's the evidence of the business that you've built?
Right.
Certainly, secondly, where do you see this business going? Do you know the rules that apply to you scaling up your business, for instance, internationally?
Right.
And all those things. But particularly coming back to the issue about how have you been running your business, can we see the paper trail? Goes back again to the issue we've talked about. Have you forgotten the legal function when you started?
Yes.
Do you have contracts in place? Have you been remitting your taxes?
Do your operations observe the law?
Do they all observe the law? Because it's not just good enough to say, well, I have not been privy to it, or I'm not aware of it and the like, because no business wants to take any legacy issue.
That's right.
That may bite them. Now that they are the parent, then they are told, oh, by the way, sorry, 6 months ago, this startup did not put reports XYZ that we needed. And so the regulator is coming to demand their pound of flesh.
And it can be simple things. For example, I'll give you an example. There is a startup, actually a few startups that I support in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And because of the nature of the industry that they are in, it required them to have something as simple as a board.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A board is a legal requirement because of the legal structure that is required for you to operate in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Now, these guys were operating. They didn't have a board. They didn't have board members on board. They hadn't held the board meetings to evidence that
they actually are complying with the law. Yeah.
But now this is a legal
issue.
So I just wanted to jump in to give you that example, that something as simple as that doesn't need money.
Yeah.
You overlook because you are overlooking what the law says in the jurisdiction where you're operating.
And sometimes, again, I come back to that issue we talked about lawyers being deemed to be expensive. It all depends on how you approach the lawyer. Some, if you approach a lawyer and say, I want a full-scale investigation into my business, you're going to be spending 20, 30 days onto this. Of course, the lawyer is going to say, oh, it's going to cost you $1 million. But sometimes it's as good as just saying, I need a conversation. I have enough money to just pay for an hour or 2 hours of your time.
Yeah.
But I would like to talk about X, Y, Z. Can you help me on that? I'll do the rest of the research myself, but this is where my ship is heading. Can you give me the highlights of what I need to look out for? It's one thing for a lawyer to draft an agreement for you, and another for the lawyer to say to you, you need to have an agreement. And your agreement needs to address these 5 critical things because of the industry that you're operating in.
Absolutely.
And then you can do the rest. Some of it you can do on your own. You can do the heavy lifting on your own. But you need to be aware exactly what you're looking at. So I like your example of a lot of these startups don't even contextualize or become aware of the fact that they are in the financial services sector, for instance.
Absolutely.
Or they are in the health sector. And therefore, the way data is treated in the health sector is certainly different from the way that any other data is going to be treated, because there's a section, particularly of the law, that says when you deal with health sector data, you need to do X, Y, Z. Same with child data, you need to know how exactly to handle that. So if you're in that space, but you don't realize that, that becomes a legal issue for any investor.
Absolutely.
They'll come to you and say, okay, how have you been handling this? And if a startup realizes, a funder realizes, hey, for the last 10 years, you've been collecting people's data, you've just been sharing this data left, right, and center, they always worry, oh, wait a minute, will someone come after me to ask for their pound of flesh? And it will happen, trust me, because when someone puts money in it and it's advertised that, oh, they've put in $1 million into this, everyone is looking.
Yeah.
And the regulator can just say, oh, by the way,
we don't know about these people.
Yeah, we'd forgotten to levy this on them. Oh, they haven't put in their tax returns from 3 years ago. Oh, here's a penalty. We need you to pay for this. So I think it's again the same conversation. Be intentional about your legal function. Be aware. Talk to the lawyers. You don't have to seek an opinion. Just seek an audience. Be made aware of what you need to be aware to contextualize where you are in that business. And then from then on, you can at least get a few ideas. And there's so many courses, free courses, by the way, online, that you can even take just to learn internationally really about working in the energy sector, working in the health sector. What are those things that you need? Because invariably, it's not so different at the end of the day. But just having that base knowledge is what you need. So I think as a founder, and I'm sure you'd have discovered this as yourself, as a founder, you got to wear so many caps. You probably are going to be your own lawyer for some time. That means you actually need to understand how to read the law. You need to know the laws for your market and the likes. Yeah. So I think all those issues are things that you really need to be aware
mindful
of.
Yeah. And so, are there any opportunities then for Zimbabwean startups to run their startups offshore, and what things should they think about if they're thinking about that?
Yeah, great. I think obviously the dream of any startup is to be big enough to now start operating worldwide. And in that respect, just a small anecdote, actually we all realize, and if the audience didn't know, the Uber idea actually came from Zimbabwe.
Right.
The founder of Uber came, if I'm not mistaken, he came to Zimbabwe, and then he saw people sharing rides.
Yes.
And then he realized, okay, this is a scalable idea. And he went back to America, and then he scaled that idea, and then he introduced ride sharing, and then at the end of it, there's a technology platform. But the point I'm trying to make is it's the intention of almost any business to be big enough in order to not just cover your borders, but also to go outside your borders. So at my firm, we actually have advised a lot of startups who want to scale their business, or we have identified funders who want to give them money in order to scale their businesses. And I think my number one cardinal rule when it comes to opportunities is that opportunities, yes, but importantly is you got to do your things above board. A lot of startups that I sometimes talk to, they always want to take the shortcut. You want to take the shortcut, you want to do X, Y, Z. So let me give you a practical example. In terms of the exchange control laws of Zimbabwe, a Zimbabwean individual cannot take on a foreign legal obligation without legally having to inform the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe that I've taken on a foreign obligation.
Right.
What does that mean? If someone is going to give you a loan from offshore and it's going to come into your coffers in Zimbabwe, you're obliged to tell the RBZ because what's going to happen is whoever has put in the money would like a return.
Absolutely.
And for you to remit that return, whether it's dividends, whether it's any other payments that you can think of, you need exchange control approval to do that.
Absolutely.
So I find a lot of startups sometimes don't get a lot of funding from international funders without actually being aware of the fact that they need to declare those loan agreements or anything that they've signed to the Reserve Bank. It's only at the stage then that they need, the funders are now saying, well, okay, send our money back, or we need to get our money back, that they realize, oh my God, we need to do that. When you come to the Reserve Bank just says to you, well, you should have done it in the first place.
Yeah,
And
but can we just hold on a minute
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Let's dissect this,
Yeah,
right? We
yeah.
are both from Zimbabwe,
Yes.
and we understand the multi-currency situation.
Yes.
If, for example, a funder, an investor is
Investor,
giving me funds,
Yes,
they need to remit them in US dollars.
in US dollars.
Now, currently, there has been challenges which are well known of people sending money to Zimbabwe in US dollars, but for some reason or the other, it may be difficult to get the money, and maybe you might have to convert that money into
Yeah.
local currency, and when you do convert to local currency, the money loses value.
Yes.
So with all these, again, challenges and currency situations changing very quickly,
Yeah.
of course, I believe the government is doing a lot of work introducing new instruments after instruments after instruments.
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to legal advice.
Yes.
But because we are not informed, or entrepreneurs are not informed, they may find it easier to just get the money sent to them via World Remit.
Yes.
So can you talk to us, entrepreneurs, about that piece?
Yeah, you know what? It's a difficult one because World Remit and Western Union are popular, money sending platforms, and you get your money in cash. You do
Yes.
what you need to do,
Yeah,
and then eventually you want to remit funds out,
correct.
which is exactly where the problem then comes. When you want to take money out of Zim, whether it's cash, whether it's anything, you always have a limit. There's a limit. For instance, if you're going to go out of Zim holding cash, I think at the last time I checked at the Harare International Airport, Robert Mugabe International Airport, I think it's maximum on you should be about $2,000,
Right.
which may not actually, no questions asked if you take $2,000, but in my experience, most funders want a sizable amount of money taken out.
Correct.
Yeah, so to your question directly, World Remit and Western Union, personally, I just think that if you want to receive funds as a business, there are more formal channels
Right.
to do it. And one thing I can think of is I know banks like Stanbic Bank who actually hold foreign currency denominated accounts. I've spoken on a platform with Standard Bank, Stanbic Bank here in London, in Birmingham, here in the UK, and they have been asking people to open accounts.
Yes.
So while sitting in the UK, whilst in the States, you can actually open a foreign currency account that is denominated in US dollars and residing in Zimbabwe.
And that
you
is a
can-
business account
is
when
a
you are
business
being
account.
intentional what you want to do with your
what
business.
you want to do with your business. So you can send money to them, and at the time that you want to remit funds, they are, so in terms of the law, banks, I'm not sure whether all banks, but most banks are recognized as authorized dealers.
Absolutely.
So they can actually convert funds
Yes.
from US dollars into local currency and vice versa. And more importantly, they can actually also approach the Reserve Bank on your behalf to get permission for you to remit funds.
Absolutely.
So what becomes critical is tell us what the source of funds is.
Yes, and I think what is critical,
Yeah.
what we are talking about for me here, what I want to highlight is that when you want to operate your business or your venture for scale, you want to attract investors.
Yes.
You want to be seen that you're serious.
Yes.
This is another pillar that you have got to be
Yeah.
well aware of, that evidence. Everything will need to be evidence, because investors will want to see that your business is in good standing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think people always look at this as a problem that needs to be addressed if someone is putting $1 million and not
Absolutely.
20,000.
Yeah.
But again, the Reserve Bank laws are clear.
Yes, they are.
Any amount that you need to remit has to be declared, particularly if it's money that's being paid off as a dividend. So then that's when you approach the Reserve Bank through your authorized dealer, which is a bank, and they get the permission for you. But that's so easy, because if you get that permission even before the money comes in, I mean, for me as an investor, if I'm going to put in money and I need you as the investee to get that exchange control approval for me to put funds so that I can get them when I'm out, then absolutely, that's actually the way to go.
Why not? Yeah.
I've worked on deals where an investor puts in $100 million. Trust me, that box has to be checked before they can even go further. You need to get the exchange control approval to be able to do that. So my message to startups is, a lot of them want to open, they are told we could take this startup and open a company in Delaware, in other areas. Don't be tempted to do that without actually getting exchange control approval, because if you don't and you get shareholding, remember what I've talked about, making an obligation, you're a Zimbabwean citizen, and you get an obligation outside the country that eventually needs money to be transferred from Zim somewhere else, you definitely would need the exchange control. So any share transfers that you're doing, you taking shareholding in foreign companies as a way of being as an investee, because I think a lot of funders or investors will come to you and say, we'll invest money in you, but you will take shareholding in a vehicle that would have created offshore.
Yes.
So as a startup, you shouldn't be tempted to do that without exchange control approval, because if you do, eventually when you want to come and get the exchange control approval, they'll deny you because you've broken the law. So I think those are things, exactly comes back to my main point. Before you take a step, consult a lawyer. And the word here, let's live with the word consult. You don't need an opinion. You don't need him to write an opinion. You don't need a Bible. You just need to, if you can, pay a lawyer whatever he charges per hour. Tell him, this is what I want to know. Am I on the correct path? And you do the heavy lifting.
And it will save you the rest of your life.
It will save you. Imagine when you have invested so much into this business, or someone is invested in you, and in the last minute you're told, oh, I'm sorry, they can't take their money out. That literally just kills the relationship before it even starts. So I think it's very important it speaks to, like I said, as an investor or a startup founder, you need to wear so many hats. And one of those is to be aware of the market that you're operating in, the conditions. So financial knowledge, very important. The rules and the legal knowledge, the rules are important. And then, of course, the others, HRR and the like, are also equally important. So it's really those facets that you need to absorb quite a lot as a startup founder. So to me, absolutely no excuse for any startup founder not to know the law in the market that they are investing in. If you have a technology platform and you want to do deliveries, you are the one who's supposed to tell me which laws apply, because it's simply sometimes an issue of just going online and researching, and where you don't understand, consult the lawyer. And then get those skills that is all drafting stuff and the like. That's what you eventually, as a startup founder, you've got to do the heavy lifting until such time that you can pay people to do it for you. So I think those opportunities are there, and I would encourage any startup which really wants to scale its business offshore to be aware of the rules. Don't break the rules. Keep a paper trail, because it's necessary for any investors who are going to come. And then the rest of it is just, ticking.
Do your things properly. Do your things properly.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
No.
You heard that. no shortcuts in this world of entrepreneurship.
I mean, maybe say, if you want to use Western Union and you want to use other platforms, if you think that's the best way for you to get the funds, fine, but still find ways to formalize it, because ultimately what counts is, can you prove that this money came offshore? So I don't necessarily want to discredit those, but usually I would encourage you to, if there are banks that operate across borders, then perhaps you can use those banks. But those platforms like Western Union, are still credible, but you just have to keep the proof that those funds came offshore. And once that proof is there, it will make it easy if you want to remit funds, or even if you want to scale your business offshore. But I think, it's quite possible, despite the challenges that we have in Zim, for funders to come in and invest in companies. And I think we have proof of so many startups which are doing quite well. Which actually have had a lot of funds put in them. And I think once we make sure that we're organized in the startup space, that would then attract more international investors. So no shortcuts.
No shortcuts, guys.
Proper thing.
Right. I know that you have a passion for teaching, and you did this as soon as you finished school. Many years later. How have you continued to nurture this passion?
I think it's. I'm sure from the conversation we've had, the long-winded conversation we've had, you can easily tell that I like to talk quite a lot. And I think when I finished, so my teaching journey is when I finished my A-levels,
Yeah.
it wasn't a gap year as such, but I took some time. As soon as I finished my A-levels, I went to teach Form 4 history
Right.
at a school for 2 terms prior to then going to university. Then I went to university. Soon after university, I started teaching the ACCA program. So
Right.
some call it ACA, but ACCA program, which is usually done by accountants. And there
Right.
was a module there that talks to business law, corporate and business law. So I taught that for about 3 years with one of actually the only accredited institution in Zimbabwe that trains chartered accountants. That's how I met my wife. So teaching has given me something.
Some benefits.
Some benefits in turn. But I think importantly that the need for me, it's really that need to always share. Even when I was a tutor, a teacher, I used to just go beyond
yeah.
what, what's called of me, because I just think, don't even sidetrack me into startups on education.
No, I was gonna talk. I wanted you to bring forward, because remember our conversation started when we were talking about the startup of the law basket in Zimbabwe. Because these guys, I attended a pitch event in them as a mentor, and they were one of the people who done their pitch, and I really thought they were going to do very well. And I know you have supported them. So talk.
True. Yeah. So how I called on to I got called on to Law Basket was that I think the word was around that I really like offering my services, teaching startups on doing generally business law, corporate law, things you need to be aware of. Exactly what we're trying to do with this startup pick that I'm talking about. Just to give you an idea of what a business is, what are the business structures you can use. Yeah. Because sometimes you don't even know what business structure I should use. Some of us end up setting up LLPs, blah, 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 without realizing that if you want to shut down that business, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Because it's going to cost you a lot of money to even shelve it. Yeah. And if you don't shelve it, then you're going to pay tax on it as you go along. So those are things that I would love startups to be aware that when you're starting, how do you structure your business? Who do you need in your business? How do you do contracts? What are the things you're looking for amongst yourself as founders? What type of agreements do you have? If you're going to approach an investor, you need a non-disclosure agreement. Absolutely. What is it? How do you skill yourself in knowing these things? What do those terms mean? How do you negotiate with investors? If you're going to do it without a lawyer present, how do you negotiate with potential investors? Are you aware of the terminology? How do you pitch, for instance, to investors? How are you pitching to investors? So all those things, I think those are the things that Law Basket asked me to come talk to. And it was a discussion with, I think, top 10 startups that had actually been identified by the UNDP, if I'm not mistaken.
UNDP, yes.
Yeah, I think it was the UNDP who had run a competition in the country.
Yes.
And originally, I think there were 30 startups. So these were like the last 10. And so I was asked to come and talk to them about, scaling their businesses, how to structure their businesses before they even move forward, protecting their businesses and their ideas and the like. So I think it's something that really I've always been passionate about. I'm just extending it to startups, but I think the bug to just teach people the concepts of law. Personally, I just believe the law should be simple. People should just be able to click a button and understand the law. And
access it. And so that's what has led you to creating the startup pack, and hopefully that's going to help you reach more audience, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, the nature of the jobs that we have in the future are really going to be so different and radically different from what we've been used in the past.
I don't think it's the future. I think it's now.
It's now, exactly. Yeah, it is now, I think so. Yeah. Because, I mean, my 10-year-old wants to be an influencer. when
she needs an influencer contract.
She needs an influencer contract. And I was teasing and I was asking her, what is an influencer?
Yeah.
Do you know, actually, in effect, most influencers are paid to advertise for something.
Yeah.
Do you know your advertising laws? What do they say? I mean, the other time I was listening to, I think yesterday, when I saw an advert for Ronaldo saying, join me on Coinbase. I think, no, Binance. Join me on Binance. Binance is a crypto platform, digital platform.
He's advertising?
Well, he's advertising, but guess what? Just last week, FTX collapsed.
Yes.
Billions of dollars got lost. Yeah. So you, the influencer, are you actually aware? Yeah. Can I sue you? Can I sue Ronaldo if Binance collapses? And I say, well, I joined it because Ronaldo said, well, come and join us. It's possible because if it's a class action act, you may want to look at it. I saw, again, I think a couple of months ago, I don't know where the case is, but someone was also trying to sue Kim Kardashian for advertising a platform on, I think, cryptos. NFT, yeah, NFTs. A lot of people advertising NFT. Half of them don't even understand what she was actually sued. And I think there's credence in that. So if you want to be an influencer, you're advertising stuff for people, are you actually aware of what it means? You must consult.
So we will need the law basket available to everyone.
Everyone,
so
yeah. So we need, we
all of us.
So I think we need that. But again, like I was just digressing from the issue of education. I think the way that people are now being taught is going to be different from the way that we were taught.
Yeah,
and I feel that the law should be accessible, and one way of doing it is just to have those apps, for instance, available that just teach people the basics. Some of them are so you can easily set them up.
Absolutely.
That they can easily be accessible. But I think, eventually, for me, ultimately, one of my hobbies is actually creating e-courses.
Yes.
So I'm trying to create small bite-sized 1 hour, 2 hour courses around, the law, basically type of companies, how do you state up companies, what does this mean? You do a course, you may have to pay $10 for it or not.
They will have
but I think ultimately you find that, and this is exactly why Law Basket was such an issue, because you could access lawyers and lawyers could access clients on that platform without all the hoops that usually go with it, making an appointment with Mr. So-and-so to come to see him to his office and paying £800 to talk to him.
Yeah.
But now we've created a market where you could just meet lawyers and lawyers could meet clients. And so an Upwork for lawyers, really.
Absolutely.
So I think, and you're going to see a lot of them cropping up and a lot of things happening. So I think it's just to keep your eyes on the ground, see what's happening. But for me, as someone who's passionate about teaching people, it means I also rise and scan. I like looking at what's happening in the market, what's happening, be knowledgeable of what's happening around you, and then hopefully you can take it from there. And then even the way that, masters and MBAs and the like, I think the days of 5-year master's degrees or those long educational degrees are probably going to be off.
Absolutely.
Because even the big education institutions are also now realizing online courses are really important, and online maybe a year and for lesser amount, but you also reach a wider audience. All of us would like to go to Harvard, and if Harvard did a cheap course on one of their platforms online, I would jump at it. So that's sort of like scaling your business. So, that's
so thank you so much. We are calling out to Harvard to have cheap courses available in law.
They do, yeah.
But thank you so much, Ronald, for your time. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And oh my gosh, you are such a gem of knowledge in the law space.
Well, thank you very much.
So we really appreciate that.
Yeah.
My last question to you is, so then in the law journey, how does success look like for you? In 1 minute, how does success look like
in 1 minute? You know what? I think it's almost, I could even pose the question to everyone in the audience to say, what does success look like to you?
Yeah.
I think it's really about, it's almost, I could even flip the question to say, what is contentment? When you say, I'm content with what I do. For me, when I'm content with what I am doing and I feel good about myself and what I've done and what I've given back, to me, I look at it as success.
Brilliant.
For me, one really big thing is always resonates in my mind is relevance. I like to be relevant.
Yes.
I think even this talk we're having, if it's not relevant, then it's really useless to a lot of people. So it's really what you need at the end of the day. Are you providing relevance in any field that you're in? Are you providing? So for me, success is tied to relevance. If I'm relevant, then in my mind, I'm building towards the success that I'd like to see. But eventually, I mean, I would like to retire at 50.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah, of course, and to leave some of these things and full-time pursue some of those passions you need. And I think I would have done a successful job as a lawyer to actually have imparted the knowledge that I gathered over the years to the others who are coming after me. And so, yeah, that's probably how a roundabout lawyerly way of saying how success looks. It's not in the dollars. It's not in the dollars, but it's in the knowledge acquired, yeah?
Thank you so much, Ronald. Honestly, I really appreciate your time. We've been recording this weird hours. As you can see, we have had to make time, but I really appreciate your time. But I think that this, for me, was one of the most important episodes because law is something that people want to shy away from.
Yeah.
And I think our audience will have many questions.
Yeah.
So how can they find you?
Okay. Well, I am a big LinkedIn fan. I just think LinkedIn is the best thing that ever happened since sliced bread. LinkedIn, I'm Ronald Mutasa on LinkedIn. That's pretty much probably the only platform I really use for any business.
And will you be advertising or talking about, we will be looking forward to the platform for the free access?
Yeah. Oh, free access
so
to,
please.
yeah. Well, well definitely as soon as
the
platform is up and when the startup pack is out, we'll definitely share the knowledge with our audience. Yeah, but yeah, basically find me on LinkedIn and I'm quite responsive and we can talk more around that.
Thank you so much, Ronald.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Time.
It's been wonderful. It's really enjoyable, and I think it's wonderful what you're doing,
Thank you.
Just having this knowledge shared with your followers and the rest
Really
of the startups.
appreciate.
And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So thank you so much for tuning into this channel. This was an interesting topic, the law, the law, the law. I hope that you've had some insights. Probably you have been challenged. If you're a business owner, is your business protected? If you are a startup or an entrepreneur, is your idea or your venture, whatever you are doing, have you taken the steps to protect it? Have you considered law as one of the major pillars that has to be part of your business and your operations? I leave these questions to you. I invite your questions to ask us on what we've discussed today. I invite you to subscribe and to share and to comment. I look forward to your interactions. Till the next episode. Bye-bye.
Fungai, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing beautifully. Thank you so much for having us here today. So,
That's amazing.
how's your day been so far?
My day has been long. I started at 5 a.m. this morning and we are still here recording. So yeah, you can see I'm tired. That was a good flow, right?
That was really good.
It was good.
Good.